You want to find your tribe of raving fans. I'm going to help you do it. This is the Digging Deep podcast with 360 Media, where we help you do better business. Hey everybody, this is Justin Lamb, and this is episode 7 of Digging Deep, and we're here with an amazing person, a client of ours, but also a very good friend. She has been the leader of the year for the Fairmont Group in 2015, and she was on her way to work remotely for 1 full year all around the world. And that got cut short because, well, the virus has taken us all over. But so she went to Santiago and then they had to suspend it. She sent back to Vancouver. So for the time being, I have the luxury of having my good friend Tiffany Elsner here from Northwild Leadership. Tiffany, how are things?
Whew, what a time to be alive, Justin. They are going, I think, wildly, and I think that's a big part of even my brand is finding the beauty and the fun and the connection in the wild, right? It's with the virus spreading all over the world. A lot of small businesses, including myself, are going through a time of turmoil, and um, an opportunity is arising, right, for us to find out how we can serve and how we can be of value to each other during this time.
Yeah, and for you, working remotely was really interesting. I mean, it comes at a really perfect time because like your whole objective was to be able to help teams and leadership groups to be able to work remotely with teams and help foster a good environment. And so it's funny that like you're on this tour and all of a sudden you get cut off. But how does that work now? Like what is going to happen, and what are you guys doing as your cohort in order to just kind of keep fostering that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So some context is there's 25 of us that were traveling the world for 1 month each, for a different country each month, and here we are now sent back to our home countries, or going there freely, back to our home countries, and now we're all disconnected, but at the same time very connected. So we're using all sorts of methods like Zoom and Slack to watch out for each other, send videos, send messages of hope, and just help each other. Right, that's one of the biggest things, is really being there for each other. Everybody has different talents and skills, and it was really amazing to see some people step up and, oh, I know, I have some experience in trying to get back insurance claims. Oh, I have some experience in trying to find flights that are really hard to find. And out of the woodwork came all of these individuals who just had these hidden talents or resources and were able to share them. And that, I think, has been the biggest driver of connection, is just that giving philosophy.
And so when you're with that, like how does that say go back towards teams then? Like if you're say because you train leadership teams, right?
Yep.
And you're training them. Uh, do you train them remotely or do you train them in person generally?
I made the shift. I train them in person, but now that I'm a virtual and remote team, we create orientation and onboarding and leadership programs all online. Yeah.
Amazing. And so when you're teaching them to do that, what is one of the key fundamentals that you have to instill with a leadership team in order for that to be successful?
The biggest is a mindset, right? And for some, it comes more naturally, and for others, I think it still can be learned. But it's that mindset of a leader does not always lead from the front, right? The leader sometimes is from the middle, sometimes from the back, right? And actually, leadership is not always taking charge, but sometimes that is supporting others to shine and others to be able to use their talents. The biggest thing is, a leader who tries to be all the things to all the people all the time, whereas a true leader understands that other people have the capacity and the talents to shine. And so what that means is sometimes the leader is actually, I don't want to say giving their power, because power is a more of an abstract thing, but they give the opportunity or the platform or the space for others to contribute. And it's just amazing what shines, right? And it's the same thing with the dynamic for the group that I was in. We have a program leader who was helping us, but really, she's phenomenal. But a big part of it was her letting other people step in and realize that she doesn't have to do everything all the time, that we're all creative and resourceful individuals. And a big part of that was nurturing the environment where we all want to step in and help each other.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. Like here at the studio, that's something that we really do believe in is it's not really trial by fire, but it's giving the people the ability to think and to critically think. Because I think one of the things that I believe in is when you're micromanaging and you're delegating everything, people turn off the critical thinking tap. And they just become robots and they just do what you want, and then all of a sudden when you need them to critically think, they don't, they don't exercise the muscle. And do you find that that's a thing in your training, in your belief system, that it's about empowerment?
Absolutely. I love that metaphor, Justin. Is it's a muscle that needs to be exercised, right? So, it really is interesting because I've seen it with businesses that don't develop their leaders. And so they micromanage to the point where you have, like you said, robots. And then when the time comes for everybody to need to be creative and step in and find their own leadership, that muscle hasn't been exercised. On the flip side, constant empowerment in whatever form that looks like is really important, creatively. And I'll give you an example even from my own business. Uh, is that we do things like creative weekly, and we actually allocate time for each of us to do creative pursuits that have nothing to do with the business. And quite a number of tech companies do something similar, more so with their trying to find more development opportunities. But for this is I allocate time on the payroll for us to just be creative. And so that way they're not always thinking about task check, task check. But now that mindset is, when I have the opportunity to create, what other things are coming out of the woodwork? And then we talk about that, right? So whether it's I decided to do a painting class or he decided to do like a cooking, fun exercise, what did we learn from it? And how can that be applied to the business is always the cool bridge. Yeah.
And that's interesting. I think that's a really interesting way to integrate creativity. And I mean, would you say that in the real world, that's sort of like team building exercises, or would you liken it to like that's people doing their own thing outside of the team environment, and then coming back with that experience and that refreshed brain, or do you feel like you can foster the same in person when you're have a group, and like you go out to do some sort of team building exercise where it's not necessarily mindless, like you're not bowling or something, but something that constructively requires them to critically think and work cohesively as a team. Is that similar?
I would say it's more of the latter. So it is more of an individual exercise. Um, I have nothing against team building exercises, but I do think sometimes when they're executed, it actually serves against the purpose when people feel like they're forced to do something, especially with the people that they are working with all the time. The reason that I chose this particular exercise of allowing time on the payroll to go and do something creative, whatever they choose, is that idea is everybody has that creativity inside of them. There's tons of people who'll be like, "Oh, I'm not creative." Give them space and time, and you'd be astounded by what happens. And really, it's fascinating what they choose and how much you learn about them that actually strengthens the relationship in the business. For example, I have a teammate who's learning another language, and so they do it more than just the time that I allocate. But that was that kind of lead in to start learning a language because, okay, well, I have time to do something interesting. And then we talk about, what did you learn? Like, what are we learning as you learn that language? what does that have to do with business? What does that have to do with marketing? What does that have to do with growth? And there's a lot of lessons that bridge over. The key for me, and as I do my master's in transformational learning, is quite often learning happens when we're not focused strictly on the learning. And that's why we do this exercise of creativity. Quite often, when it's too forced, like I'm sitting you down in a classroom and you're gonna learn, the majority of the learning happens actually when it's applied and experienced. And so, without explicitly saying it, this exercise of creativity is they're learning, they don't realize that they're learning until we talk about it.
And you know what? It's funny because children are the same. And I liken it to that everybody feels like, especially now, this is really relevant for anybody who has children at home. But when your children are at home, parents have this innate need that they feel like they have to keep the kid occupied at all times. And whether that means that they put them in front of the boob tube, like the television, or they try to do an activity or make them, do stimulating things. What they forget is that letting children be bored prompts them to be creative. Like, so here's a case in point. Like we have Belle here because now the daycares are closed, and of course we didn't really want to put her out there now that it's getting really widespread. So she's there, and we structured a part of her day where we do have some exercises and stuff like that relate to learning, but then we give her time to be bored. And of course the first 5 or 6 minutes of that boredom time is she's clinging on to us, she's wanting us to engage in her, she wants us to play. And we've now made it a point where we try to ignore it and force her to go on her own to do things. And it is really amazing because that creativity all of a sudden exists. She will tell you that she's bored, and I imagine that that's the same as a person saying I'm not creative. But at the same token, you leave them for a little bit and their mind goes, well, they're not going to engage, I might as well do something. And they go, and she'll go drawing, or she'll make an arts and craft, or she'll go play and use toys or whatever it might be. But I think that creativity sparks out of when your brain gets a moment to breathe and isn't constantly stimulated. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Because think about it, and I even think about my own life, as an entrepreneur and a traveler and a girlfriend and a daughter, and like all of these roles that you're like filling all the time. When do you actually sit? Like, even when we're in the grocery stores, we're on our phones. When we're in the doctor's office, we're on our phones. And my phone died like a few weeks ago, just because I didn't charge it. But just standing there and looking up, being like, huh.
There's sky.
And it's amazing how much comes when your mind isn't occupied about a specific thing, right? To let our minds wander and explore. And I mean, a lot of people do that with meditation or yoga practices, but the reality is that's not accessible at all levels right away. It takes a lot of work sometimes to access this, but there's simple ways, like I said, tapping into something that somebody's like, ooh, this is a creative fun exercise, that does the same thing without having to sit there trying to be like, I'm focusing, I'm focusing, I'm focusing. It's it's different ways to achieve a very similar result of tapping into what's going on in your mind on a bigger level.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. I think people who are listening to this will find that quite a useful piece. So why don't we turn our attention to working remotely? So now this is an interesting thing, and this is something that you've been working on for quite some time to get your business to be able to weather things like this, where you are not able to be in person. So what are the things that you put into place for your business in order for you to be able to do that and function and make sure that the clients that you serve are supported?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting road to actually transition. A big part of that was, even while I was serving local clients, was to start using all of the tools. So as you're familiar, Zoom is a great one. Slack is great. Some companies use things like Basecamp. But the important thing is, even before you're remote, is to start using those tools already. There's people who work in offices who already use these types of communication structures, uh, because I've been experiencing it, like, as I see universities all of a sudden flailing because they do not know how to teach online. I've been talking to, I met some university students who were studying abroad in Chile, and as that transition happened like this, they were appalled at how people, their professors or the administration had no idea how to structure things virtually, which is kind of surprising considering that this technology has been available and a lot of it free. Um, so the fact that there hasn't been kind of that progression into at least learning about it, even if they're not teaching virtually. So this has been a very fascinating way to see which businesses have prepared for the fact that virtual work and virtual learning is becoming a thing versus those who perhaps were resistant to it have learned very quickly through, I guess, trial and error what it means to set that up.
So,
But
and so
yeah.
just a quick thing because I've got a thought in my head, but when say a person from a university does maybe see this podcast, is Northwild leadership geared to help a university train and get their things online? Like, are you able to help implement some structure and or infrastructure for them to then take their courses online, or is that out of scope for you?
Absolutely. This is an opportunity that we haven't seen before, right? There's a lot of online learning forums and platforms. I've even been the student of several online. And what I've learned from both aspects is what works and what doesn't in terms of learning retention. And I'll circle back to what my master's is my master's program is entirely virtual. And the beauty of that is really understanding how do we create experience when you're not together. And so we focus on both for businesses and educational institutes is how does that learning happen? Obviously, it's slightly different for the corporate world, but the more that I dive into the work with my professors, I'm able to use those same principles and apply them to the education that that rapidly needs it right now, right? Is how do we create that infrastructure? And the funny thing is it's not as difficult as it needs to be. And that's the interesting thing is sometimes it's just keep it simple. Right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people try to overcomplicate things, and even I think as more and more business owners are starting to move to Zoom as a platform just to kind of engage in people, I see that there's such a steep learning curve, and there's such a resistance, like because it's new, and we all resist things that are new and unfamiliar, but that resistance is there, and I think. When you're uncomfortable and out of your element, it really does show. But I think, for me now that we've done this podcast a few times, I'm getting more and more comfortable being in front of camera, looking straight into the lens. I mean, usually I'm behind the camera and it's a little bit different, but this time, like being in front of a person and asking more pertinent questions, um, things that are more relevant and having better dialogue has really come a long way. And I think it's one of those things. It's like another muscle. We have to practice it. So I mean, hopefully that this helps a lot of people in being locked down and getting into this, because I think as the world moves into video and more of a digital environment, like this is a really invaluable skill to have.
Absolutely.
So then for you, I know that you have a virtual assistant, much like I do, as well as like in-house staff for me, but like because it's completely virtual and you were going to go abroad, and we help you in the back end with marketing as well. Can you talk about how that structure works with you and a virtual assistant? Because I think people are often curious about what virtual assistants do and how you can transition um, that information and get them on board, because I think that's the hardest part of this entire journey, right?
Mhm. I would say that the onboarding process for us was probably simpler than um, many because I went for a company belay that actually provides VAs all over. And so they actually have a system already where I could come in as their client and I was walked through it. So there was, first of all, was really great was once I was matched is an interview between me, my VA, and um, I would call him like the engagement manager. So to basically um, facilitate that, because that's so important, was the fit, right? So it wasn't they just chose a VA for me. I was part of that process. Another big part of the onboarding process was making sure that the skills match. So somebody can be phenomenal as a person, but if their skills don't match what you're looking for, and so there were some resumes that were outstanding but didn't include what I needed, right? And so, like for example, I have a bookkeeper and accountant. I don't need somebody who's going to excel at that because that's not something I want the VA for. Um, Another one was, this is a big one for me, is personality fit. Because I don't want somebody who's just a task rabbit. Although my VA, we call him the task ninja. Uh, I was looking for somebody that we can send random gifts towards each other, that I care about their life, they care about mine. Because we've been through a lot of ups and downs as individuals, and to understand that was also really important, that we don't work in a silo, because that's not how I want this relationship to be. And as I grow my team, that's not how I want to be structured either. One of the really important things is weekly contact. Life gets crazy, and sometimes both one or both of us are like, oh, I kind of want to cancel our check-ins, but our check-ins are so important. This allows us to keep grounded, as well as to say things that might not necessarily be on our project management system, because there's a lot that happens in between the tasks. And going back to that creative realm, that's when we bounce ideas off each other and really grow into what some of these things are. A really big thing is, as important as it is to map out the projects, we take it step by step, because quite often you'll take a couple steps and stumble and be like, oh, that wasn't quite the right fit. So you pivot. And so it's good to have that overarching, but those weekly calls allow us to troubleshoot and become, be more agile to what we're doing, because as we are helping our clients, we are also growing as a business.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to recap that for people, it's really about not only getting a person who is a virtual assistant, but it is about fit. It's at the end of the day, you're still building a team. It might not be in house or in your office, but they're an extension of you. And if they're not thinking and they're not on the same page, they have different core values, different belief systems. They conduct their work as such, and I think that's a big part of company culture. And I think that's where a lot of people fail with virtual assistants, because they try to look for the cheapest dollar value, and that might not necessarily be the best bang for your buck. I mean, people are going to Fiverr, or they're going to Upwork, and they're trying to find these people who don't necessarily have that same uh, mindset. They're just scrambling, or they're just trying to pay the bills, and they don't really care. And when you're hiring somebody like that, the frustration comes because you want them to perform at like this level, but their capacity is only at this level, because they're charging a lower amount for sometimes for an obvious reason, but that skill set difference is really can be really huge. And so in the interview process, when you went through with your virtual assistant, like how much in-depth material did you have to go through? Like, what did you prepare for that person to understand or to know that that was going to be the right fit for you? And did you have to go through one or two of them to find the right one for you?
For this specific placement, because I had somebody else looking at my qualifications, they were already weeding out quite a few of them. But as we met on the interview, he was the first one I interviewed, but it was a really good fit right away. But was really nice was that option of, like, even he said, and even the engagement manager said, if it's not the right fit, we will find it, and there's no hard feelings here. And that's what's really important to know, is like, as humans, we're like, I don't want to offend them, but it's okay if it's not a right fit. And the other part is that continued continued communication. For us, I look at it as I'm not a boss and a VA, but rather we're working together. And our calls end with, "What would you like to see more of, or what could I do differently?" From both of us, because just because I'm the one paying the VA doesn't mean that I and it's creating that relationship where communication is open, because and we laugh about it, but he can provide me honest feedback being like, "I need, you to post this more frequently," or "I need this," and vice versa. I'm like, I need this from you. And there's no hard feelings because we know we're coming from a place of growing together. And that's what I think is so important. But if that's not established right off the bat, and that was something that was very clear in the interview process to me, if somebody wasn't willing to say no or to speak up, that wasn't somebody I wanted to work with.
That's really good. We had similar, the onboarding process, because our current VA is not the first one. I think she's number 3 or 4 over the course of the last few years. But I think one thing that people need to do, especially as you're developing your relationship, is to create a standard operating procedure and keep updating it as you evolve, as you find like ways to be more efficient with your VA. I think a lot of people forget and they just leave it up here. And that's not a really good place to be, because we assume that in our hearts we hope that that VA is forever, especially if you find the right one. But the reality is people's lives change, and so do the circumstances of which you have to work. And so sometimes that VA will have to disappear or be off your radar, and then you feel like you have to start all over again. And if you have the proper onboarding process and you've documented that stuff and you're updating it constantly as you evolve, that makes the transition easier for if you're going to find another person. So, that's something for I think people to take away.
That is a great point, Justin. And I would say that that's word of advice for companies, period, right? Whether it's a VA or not. And this is actually a lead into what I do as a business, because quite often when you're a small business, when you onboard somebody, you're flying by the seat of your pants, right? It's okay, I'm going to onboard them, and then the next one joins, and then we're a team of 7, and then 8. And you're just kind of doing it as you go along, and maybe you're learning some things. But how are you actually creating a standard operating procedure, right? Are there things that everybody needs to go through? Because when you get to employee number 10, oh, I forgot to get them their login credentials. Oh, I didn't order them a uniform, or whatever may have you. And things start to get lost in the shuffle. And when you've spent so long looking for great people who are culture fit, talent, and, have that growth capacity, and then they're like, oh, clearly this business doesn't care about me enough to actually have a nice, smooth onboarding process, it's starting the relationship off on the wrong foot, and you as a business owner are sacrificing so much of your investment by not having a really smooth orientation and onboarding to the company.
Yeah, and it's not only the investment; it's the financial outlay that comes with it, because your onboarding process is now longer, and the lead time for that person to get up to speed is way more um, convoluted than it needs to be. And so, one of the things that I wanted to see what your opinion was. I personally feel like people should put their onboarding document into something like Google Documents, where it can be changed, it can be indexed and searched quite easily and shared, so people can search it. I know some people are really big fans of printed documents, but I'm a fan of the virtual one because it's easier to find an index and change and be nimble, whereas thumbing through stuff means that you have to print it every time that you make a change. What are your thoughts on that?
I would lean towards virtual, obviously, because I work with remote and virtual companies. And yes, something like a simple and free, like Google Sheets or Google Docs, works wonders. It's amazing how much. And again, if you're a small business and you're trying to stay low overhead and agile, Google has so many things available. And I would say keep it simple, right? Like as you said, a simple Word doc takes 1 second to open up and just start clicking. Um, the other part that, and depending on what your business structure is, the other part that's beautiful about it is that constant editing availability from many different sources, and then also to be able to track who's done what in case you need to
In case you
go
have to
back to
wind it
previous.
back a little bit.
Yes. My one thing would be is, yes, you can edit the Google Docs, but make sure you save different versions of them as you go along in case you make lots of changes. It is kind of nice to say, oh, what did we do 5 months ago versus what are we doing now, in case you want to actually pull some of that information back.
That's
But
very
again,
interesting.
very easy to duplicate and archive.
That's a very interesting tip. I think that's something that I could learn from. I think that's something that we don't necessarily implement. We have the Google Docs and onboarding, but it is just ever evolving, and we've never actually thought about snapshotting it and leaving it as a V1, maybe something to do every quarter or every year to get a different snapshot. But that's an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
Cool. And so, um, what now? Like in this environment where everything is virtual, what is the outlook for your particular business at this point?
Whew, that's a hard question. I am just as uncertain as many other businesses. As you're familiar, although I am virtual, a number of my businesses are not entirely virtual, and so they've been cutting staff. A lot of people losing work right now, and so of course, this may seem like a luxury for some. And at the same time, um, my business, because it's virtual and small team, is able to pivot. And one of the things that we've pivoted to is to help existing businesses who are not necessarily growing, but who are moving to remote work. And so initially, in the last few months, it was really focusing on how do we grow teams that are going virtual bigger. Now it's, well, clearly there's a market need for all of these businesses who were meeting in offices, even small, like nonprofits, corporations, or even the ones that work in co-working spaces with just offices of 4 or 5 people. How do we move that entirely remote? And for some, it's a massive transition, and for some, it's, especially if they had flex work policies are smaller. But now it's creating and the structures for these businesses. How do they continue learning, and how do we continue developing their cultures that are strong, regardless? And so it's a lesson for general business as well as for my company. It's how do we look at the market and see how best can we serve with our existing talents and our existing structures.
Amazing. And for a person who wants to find out more information, they can find you at Northwild Leadership. Is it .com or .ca?
.com. I
Excellent.
know.
Northwildleadership.com. Amazing. So thank you so much. I think this is really amazing. I'm really excited to share this podcast with people. I think it's really relevant, and I think a lot of people are going to find tremendous value in if they're looking for uh, people to work remotely and or onboard virtual assistants, or to find ways to transition their existing business into a more virtual space and be able to still onboard a team. I think that's a lot of things that people are keeping in their mind right now. So I think that's a bright future ahead, and right now laying out that groundwork is going to be tremendous for you.
Thank you. Well, and oh, I was going to say that just keep supporting each other. Community, compassion, that's what we need, not only as businesses, but as individuals. So thank you for the opportunity to share and connect further.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time. All right, everybody, thank you so much. If you guys found value in this, please feel free to hit that subscribe button, because everybody who subscribes really just helps the algorithm. My goal is to help 1,000 business owners move the needle in any way, shape, or possible, and help you impact the communities that you serve. So hope you guys found value in this. You can find this on Spotify if you're watching it on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, you can go to our YouTube channel and be able to find these videos. Thank you very much. And Tiffany, I look forward to doing another podcast with you in the future. Thanks.